Today, we are putting on our detective hats and digging into a text that has, profoundly shaped Western culture for 2,000 years, the Gospel of Matthew.
You know, for centuries, the first book of the New Testament was just accepted as an eyewitness report. The author? Well, that was Matthew, the apostle who literally walked with Jesus. And thinking it came from a direct witness, that gave the text this immense authority. So where did this whole tradition even come from? Well, the earliest clue we have points to a writer from the 2nd century named Papias. He claimed Matthew wrote in Hebrew, and that everything we have now is just a translation of that original. For hundreds and hundreds of years, this was the bedrock of the entire case.
And that is the absolute core question for modern scholars. What happens when you set tradition aside for a moment and look only at the evidence inside the document? A very different picture starts to emerge. So today, we're going to treat the text like a crime scene. We're looking for clues in the language, the structure, everything to see what story the gospel tells about itself.
All right, let's dive right in. We're going to examine the primary evidence, the gospel's own words and structure. You can think of the text as our main witness in this whole investigation.
So on one hand, you have the tradition, an eyewitness, Matthew, writing in Hebrew. But on the other hand, the text itself seems to be telling a completely different story. It's written in this polished Greek, it relies heavily on other sources, and it even has a few mistakes that a native Hebrew speaker probably wouldn't make. So let's follow these clues, one by one.
The first major clue is the author's relationship with the Gospel of Mark, which most scholars are pretty sure was written earlier. Now, our author doesn't just borrow from Mark, they use about 90% of it, often cleaning up the grammar and smoothing out the story. And this raises a huge question. If you were actually there, if you were an eyewitness, why would you base your own account so heavily on the work of someone who wasn't?
Okay, clue number 2 is the language itself. And this one directly contradicts that claim from Papias. The Greek in Matthew is fluent, it's sophisticated. It is not the clunky prose you would expect from a simple translation. And here's the kicker, not a single ancient copy of a Hebrew original has ever been found. Instead, the author uses specific Greek terms, like phylacteria for Jewish prayer boxes, that really suggests they were part of the Greek-speaking world of the Roman Empire.
And you know, sometimes it's the smallest error that's the biggest clue of all. In Hebrew poetry, it's super common to say the same thing twice just for emphasis. You know, like saying someone arrived on a donkey, even on a colt. It's one animal. But the author of Matthew seems to have read this literally and describes Jesus riding 2 separate animals. A slip-up like this is pretty telling. It suggests an author who was reading the scriptures in Greek, but didn't have that native's feel for Hebrew poetic style.
Okay, with these textual clues now in hand, let's try to build a timeline. Pinpointing when this was written is absolutely key to understanding the author's motive and message. By piecing all this evidence together, we can really narrow down a window of time. So it had to be written after its main source, Mark, was finished. It also talks about the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE, like it's already happened. And it had to be written before other Christian writers started quoting it around the year 110. All of that leaves us with a surprisingly tight window, sometime between 80 and 90 CE.
Right, so with the time established, scholars then ask, where was this community? Where was the scene of the crime? The setting can tell us a ton about what issues the author was trying to tackle. A few locations have been thrown out there. Could it have been Alexandria? Possible, but the evidence is pretty thin. What about Jerusalem? That would fit the Gospel's intense focus on Jewish tradition, but the city was basically in ruins at the time this was written. A much stronger contender is a place like Caesarea Maritima, which was a huge hub for both Jewish and Christian thinkers. Ultimately, the evidence really points toward a community somewhere in the region of Syria-Palestine. This area was a total melting pot. It had vibrant Jewish communities right alongside a growing Christian movement that included both Jews and Gentiles. And this fits perfectly with the themes in the Gospel, which is constantly in a dialogue with Judaism while also looking outward to this new mission to non-Jews.
So after looking at the text, the timeline, the location, what kind of final profile emerges? Let's put all these clues together.
So, our final profile? Well, it looks nothing like the Apostle Matthew. The evidence points instead to a really skilled but anonymous author from the next generation of believers. This was a Jewish Christian, for sure, but one who was highly educated, wrote in Greek, and was probably more of a community teacher or scribe than a fisherman or tax collector.
I want you to think of this person as a master weaver. They took earlier sources, like Mark's Gospel and a collection of Jesus' sayings, and expertly wove them together with their deep, deep knowledge of Jewish scripture. This wasn't just some author. This was a teacher, carefully shaping a new, compelling story for a community that was really at a crossroads.
And this author wasn't just writing history. They were writing to a community in crisis. Just try to picture it. A group of Jewish followers of Jesus, whose entire world had been shattered by the temple's destruction. They were asking these urgent questions about their identity. Like, how can we be faithful to our Jewish roots, but also follow this new path and open our doors to non-Jews?
So you see, understanding this context doesn't diminish the text at all. If anything, it brings it to life. We stop seeing it as just a simple record and we start to see it as a powerful, persuasive argument written for a very specific community trying to find its way. It forces us to ask a totally different question when we read, not just what happened, but why was this story told in this exact way at this exact moment? And honestly, that changes everything.